Hello there.
Hello there.
Welcome to Vital Signs. Today, we're talking about joints. I'm Professor Thomas, and I'm here to give you a crash course on A&P. A little bit about me. I spent 2 years in orthopedics. I was with an orthopedic company replacing hips, knees, sometimes even fingers. After that, I got into teaching just like the other Professor Thomas. We teach the same thing at 2 different schools. I've been brought on to teach you about joints, give you some of my knowledge. By now, you've gone over some of the functions, main functions of the skeletal system. We know that it's there to protect us, protect our internal organs, give structure to our body, but then also provide a means by which we can move. The bones aren't moving. Instead, they provide a means by which we can move by using the muscular systems. Those points, those articulations between bones are where we're going to see that movement. We like to call those joints or articulations. So we have two main functions of joints. First of all, we're going to hold the bones together securely. It could be long bones. We could be talking about the humerus, the ulna, and the radius, forming that elbow joint. We're holding those bones together in some form and fashion with ligaments, with tendons, and of course muscles that overlay on top of those joints to hold those bones together. Also, this, like I said, it gives us mobility in our body. There is one exception in your body, and you've probably covered it by now. You've probably heard about it by now. The hyoid bone is the only bone in the body that does not articulate with any other bone, which means it doesn't have a joint to it. Getting into it, we have really 3 functional and structural classifications when we're talking about joints, right? And we always start with the structural classification because that gives us a pretty good indication of how we're using that joint, that articulation between 2 bones in the body. Not all joints are created equal, and we're going to see that today. But let's start with our structural classifications of joints. First of all, we have our fibrous joints. These are tough, dense, kind of like the glue between bones and our body. This is where we don't want any movement between bones. Think of your skull, first of all. We don't want bone-on-bone contact. That's a big no-no in orthopedics. That contact between bones is like rubbing 2 pieces of concrete together. It's not smooth. It's not good. We have nerves in all of our bones that can sense that sort of friction and vibration between 2 bones, and it hurts a lot. We want to prevent that as much as possible. That's why we have our articular cartilage on the ends of our long bones. That's why we have these joints so well protected, sometimes filled with like an oily fluid, a synovial fluid, in order to protect us, to make us frictionless. With our cranial bones, we still want to hold those together, and we don't want that bone-on-bone contact. So that's where we use a fibrous joint, something like the glue. In the cranial bones, we call those sutures of the skull. The next type of structural classification we have of joints is cartilaginous. This is made up of, again, connective tissue, but it's going to be a hyaline or fibrocartilage that we're going to be using, kind of gluing 2 bones together, but giving a little bit of give and flexibility to that area where we're connecting these bones. So a good example of this would be like the pubic symphysis in the coaxial bones. Pubic symphysis is going to be a little bit more flexible, but it's still acting as a glue, holding those coaxial bones together to make up the pelvis. Our last type of structural classification of joints is a synovial joint. These are the bread and butter of orthopedics, the bread and butter of joints, in my opinion, because these synovial joints are going to be where we're finding the synovial membranes, where it's going to be a joint encapsulated in this synovial membrane. It's going to be a connective tissue covering that secretes our very special synovial fluid. I like to think of this as kind of like the oil in your car, right? It keeps all of the parts and pieces of your engine nice and lubricated so that, again, we're not getting bone-on-bone contact. And it also gives us an increased amount of frictionless environment, right? We get this frictionless environment so that when we're trying to move this joint freely, we can do it with no problem. Our 3 functional classifications of joints are synarthroses, amphiarthroses, and diarthrotic joints. Now, starting with synarthroses, this matches up almost perfectly with our fibrous structural classification of joints. We don't want any movement. We want to act as glue between bones, again, like those cranial bones, the sutures of the skull. So we're going to classify those as a non-movement joint. Again, we're just using that for glue purposes between 2 bones. We're calling that a synarthrotic joint. What about the next one, amphiarthrotic? Amphiarthrotic is giving us dual function. These are going to match up really well with our cartilaginous joints, where we get slight movement out of that joint, a little bit of flexibility, but we're still trying to stabilize the connection between these two bones. The pubic symphysis or even the vertebral discs between the vertebrae are going to be amphiarthrotic joints, where we get slight movement, a little bit of flexibility, and give. Amphiarthrotic joints are going to be our place to do that. All right, our last functional classification of joints are diarthrotic joints. These are our freely movable, classic sort of joints that we think about when we're moving our body, right? These match up perfectly with the synovial structural classification of joints. I'll say that not all fibrous joints are synarthrotic joints. Not all cartilaginous joints are going to be amphiarthrotic joints, but I will say all synovial joints are diarthrotic joints, right? Those two go hand in hand. They're almost synonyms for each other. If you want to just say like a synovial joint, everybody will know you're talking about a diarthrotic joints, right? These are covered by that synovial membrane, freely movable. We get range of movement out of these joints depending on where it is in our body that we're talking about. There's a difference, especially when we're talking about like our hand bones versus something like our elbow or our shoulder, where we get an increased amount of movement out of those bones. All right. So when we're talking about our diarthrotic or synovial joints, we like to break it down into our types of movement and our classification of joints that we see throughout the body. We like to talk about movement on a joint in terms of an axis, right? An axis like, you know, how the globe of the Earth spins on an axis. That is just one axis that the Earth moves on. Well, we're going to do the same thing with our joints, right? We like to start with non-axial movement. That means we're actually not on an axis, but we do like a sliding or gliding type of movement between two bones in a synovial joint. An example of a non-axial type of gliding movement is like a plane joint in your carpals, right? The carpals and the tarsals in the feet, very small bones in our hands and feet. They are still considered synovial joints, even though they just do that sort of non-axial sliding, gliding movement. All right, next up is uniaxial. Uniaxial is movement in one axis in one plane. Our examples of synovial joints are going to be hinge and pivot joints in the body. Hinge joints we know and love. Things like our elbow is on a hinge, moving again in just one axis. Same with our knee, moving in one axis, doing flexion and extension. A pivot joint, think of like your neck, right? You can rotate and pivot your neck. We can also do the same thing, doing a supination or pronation sort of movement with the ulna and the radius. Okay, our next type is a biaxial type of movement. This is movement in two planes, like going side to side and frontwards, backwards. The two synovial joints that we have in our body that work off this biaxial movement are condylar and saddle joints. Now, condylar and saddle joints are both found in the same location in your body, in your hands. We get a lot of movement type out of our hands, especially with our fingers. For our condylar joints, between the metacarpals and the phalanges, right? Like our pointer finger. The other one, the saddle joint, is going to be like our thumb, right? Between the carpals and the metacarpals of your thumb is a saddle joint. Again, both of these do biaxial movement. Our last type of movement is multi-axial. Now, this corresponds to the ball and socket joint that we have in our body. We have two ball and sockets in our body. We have the shoulder and we have the hip. Both of those doing multi-axial movement in all planes, in all directions. There you have it. Those are your joints. Thank you for joining me on Vital Signs, and I will see you next time.